Hello again. Welcome to the second installment of making clay using our salt ceramic texture tools. Just want to show you guys what came out of the oven the other day. So those are very hard, okay, salt ceramic texture tools. So we're going to be working with these today and just sort of see how they function for us with the clay. And so I'm going to be rolling out a slab for us. We're going to be using these texture tools, sort of seeing what we can come up with, and then we're going to be forming essentially a slab vessel. So I'm going to be doing this pretty basic, but one thing I do want to mention is just sort of how I sort of use what I have around me to generate some forms. With slab work, we have the option to roll out the slab, essentially creating, a sheet of clay. We can use paper templates. So, for instance, I use a lot of this, and I've showed you all this in class before, but I use a lot of these paper templates here. And so, for instance, I would lay that over the clay, and then I would essentially trace that out and cut it just like paper. And then that would fold into a form like this. So then essentially I would end up with a conical form. So you can basically use your two-dimensional templates to create a three-dimensional form, okay? You can get as crazy with that as you want. I think about it sort of like sewing patterns a little bit, where you're starting two-dimensionally, but how you assemble those things, you start to create dimension. So you can get complicated using patterns, creating individual, essentially, slabs that then you assemble. But you can also just take that single slab and drape it, right? So we have seen in the studio, there's a bunch of like plaster drape molds, for instance, that you can use. But then there's just a lot of stuff that you may have sitting around your house. So, for instance, this is just a cardboard shipping tube, basically. You can go to FedEx, UPS. This is a UPS one. You can sort of find these in the trash all around. I just cut this in half using my pole saw, which is just a saw I had at home. And I can drape over this, for instance, to give me a nice little serving dish, right? I happen to have a bunch of foam. As I mentioned, I'm sort of a material hoarder. So I just go to Michael's or Joann's or whatever when stuff's on sale, and I just buy these foam. So it's like a small half dome. I have some larger dome pieces that I've made as well. These are some essentially like wreaths that I cut in half and sort of formed myself, but then I could drape clay over this, for instance. Those are just some small examples, but you'd have to go purchase those parts. Then we're back to this pillowcase that I showed you last week. That would be our work surface if we didn't have a canvas covered table. What I've done and what I love to do is I can essentially tie rope, right, to maybe every corner of this. Then if I drape that or suspend it, I can get these really beautiful curves in a vessel that I might not be able to get otherwise. So essentially I would just lay my ceramic in there and let it kind of hang till it's dry and just cover it with a little bit of plastic. So there's a lot of forming options. You can get really creative. And you don't even have to think about this like a vessel. So, for instance, you could take just different objects and sort of set them up around you and maybe lay the slab over that and almost start to create this like landscape. So we're getting into maybe more of this sculptural zone a little bit. Okay, so slab work, lots of different ways we can go about it. Essentially, we're literally creating our canvas by rolling out a slab, and then what we do with that canvas is all up to our imagination, okay? So these are just some pieces of plywood that I had laying around. I use these for glazing, so I glaze in the round with my work, so you can see I've sort of set my work on those to let the glaze drip. So I just had these laying around. These are 1/2 inch thick, and I'm going to use these as my thickness gauges today. I'm going to bring back the hangers, and so an individual hanger is about 1/4 inch thick. But if I actually tape those together, I have about 1/2 inch thickness. So if you have 4 hangers in your house, which I hope you do, if not, you can definitely have some of mine, then I would just tape these together and put them on either side, and I'm going to have 1/2 inch thickness gauge there, okay? You can also just use your eye. I mean, if we're a little bit off in one direction, you know, it's not going to be the end of the world, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and wedge this clay up just a little bit. Again, sorry if the camera kind of shakes here a little bit. So I've already wedged this clay. I'm just sort of going to get that back into some sort of usable place. All right, and then I'm just going to start to press that out. And I want this to be, I'm actually going to be draping it over this today. So I'm going to start to get my form going in that direction, okay? So I'm going to bring these in. If I have to drape over this form, I want to think about pulling this out. So this distance looks about good. So I'm going to keep it right there. Then I have my trusty rolling pin. And again, if you have like a detachable broom handle, you know, some of those thread in, you can remove those and use those as your roller. So I'm just kind of rolling here, trying to get that as even as possible. Pressing kind of hard. It's not the softest clay, but it's not the hardest clay, so could be worse. Go ahead and button that in a little bit. Now, here's the thing. If you want this to be very rigid and consistent, go ahead and grab your knife, and then you can just go ahead and cut that into a more rectilinear form if that's what you're looking for. I'm actually totally cool with this kind of organic thing, especially because I will be laying it over such sort of a geometric shape. I'm kind of into this idea of counteracting that a little bit through the sort of, you know, organic edge here. So, main point of this story is how the heck do these texture tools work, okay? So, let's see, let's give it a go. We're in this together, y'all. I haven't actually tried this. So I'm gonna see how much the clay sticks. Do I need to maybe wet this? Is it better dry? Let's find out together, okay? So I was thinking that I was gonna actually start off the edge here and press in. And then you can see we got some texture. And I was going to alternate that, almost getting this sort of like brick pattern a little bit. And then maybe we'll fill that in with some other textures that we've made. So I'm just pressing this tool into my clay. And it's actually a pretty interesting texture pattern, if you will. tied up here. And I'm just gonna sort of cover this whole thing. And I'll go sideways here. One more on the side. So I ended up actually cooking this for quite a while, the tools. I think I probably could have added a bit more salt and maybe a little less water. That's sort of what I'm thinking. It's still a little doughy, actually, which you can see. So they're not holding up. But what's nice is I still have more than half the dough that I made yesterday in the refrigerator, just in a Tupperware, so I could easily come back, make some more tools, do some more testing, okay? So oftentimes when I work, I'll work slabs on a piece of paper, and what's really nice with that is I can sort of move them around pretty easily. So remember, when we work with slabs, we don't just pull, right? So I'm going to start, I'm going to come under, and then I'm going to support that, right? We want to create support. Now I have my whole arm here supporting the slab. I'm going to lay down my sheet of paper, and then I'm just going to lay my slab back down. Now what this allows me to do is pick up the paper, and then I can really move my slab around pretty easily. So this will be the bottom of my vessel, okay? I'm gonna bring over my trusty mold here. And then this is really why I use the paper. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab some plastic. And what I like to do is I tend to get myself set up. So I have my slab on the paper, I have my mold ready to go. Then again, you know, you can grab some thick cardboard as well. I'll have my sort of wear board, right? And then I'll go ahead and put my plastic on the wear board. Then I'll put my mold on the plastic. Then I can take my slab, lay that over the drape, start to slowly form that in. Now I can even come back, add some additional texture. Ooh, I like our peanut butter cookie texture. You guys see that? You can see it, good. So I might add some additional texture here. And the really nice thing about just sort of slumping slabs is it's relatively quick in terms of making, and they're very functional. Now obviously this is a rounded form, so I'm gonna have to put some feet on this, okay? So I'm super into this peanut butter cookie, especially as it sort of contrasts, so it's still circular, so it corresponds with the previous pattern we had, but it adds a little bit of like energy. I'm gonna go ahead and maybe press a little bit over there. Cool. Kind of playing with the edge a little too, right? So considering all aspects of that form. All right. So what we can also maybe recall from last week is sort of how we can stabilize a form and what that looks like, right? So I'm thinking for this, you know, we sort of did the ball feet last time, and I think the ball feet could work really well for this. So I'm actually going to go with that. Now remember, a foot can be anything. So I could roll a coil, for instance, and go ahead and maybe put 2 long coils. Those are feet. I could put coils just sort of perpendicular to the length at either end. Those are feet, okay? I'm going to go ahead and do, I'm actually going to do 4 feet on this one. I'm going to do 2 here and 2 here, maybe more towards the center. really so that you don't see them right on the edge, and sort of that vessel is going to look like it's floating a little bit. So I'm just going to roll some balls. And I don't want these huge. I just want these so I can get my fingers under this if I want to lift it to take it off the table. And you know, I just want it to be stable. So you want them relatively the same size, but what we're going to do is we're going to sort of pat these down a little bit to make sure that they're nice and even. Remember that last time I mentioned 3 feet sometimes are more stable than 4, because 4 you're giving it that extra option to be unbalanced, where 3 it tends to always find its balance, which is why tripods are tripods and not quad pods. You know, for cameras, for instance. Okay, so now we have 4 feet. So I'm going to go ahead and slip and score those. So remember, scoring and slipping, we don't necessarily need to add slip because water and clay equals slip. Okay, what I am going to do is, before I do any of that, sort of map out where these might go, so I have them relatively in line with each other. And I'm going to go ahead and just mark where each one of those go so I can stay organized with what I'm making. And what's really nice about this is it's pretty quick and easy. There's limited parts, so when I bring my work back to school to be fired, I'm not as concerned with it breaking on the transport. Okay. So I have, again, just my trusty bucket of water over here that I'm just dipping in as I score to create the slip. Okay. Gonna do the same thing here, remembering to score in both directions to create that lock. Go ahead, press it on, give it that wiggle. All right, rinse and repeat. Remember that wiggle, it's locking in our score using the water and the platelets of the clay, right? So essentially we're bringing those two parts together. So ain't gonna work without the wiggle, right? It's like standing on a dance floor, right? Go ahead and get your boogie on. No standing on the dance floor here. And we'll do one more. And I actually kind of like the scoring that's happening that I did to mark where I was going to put my feet. And I might even actually accentuate that a little bit. Okay. So those are our feet. And we want to make sure that those are going to line up. So I'm actually just going to grab another flat surface that I happen to have. And then I'm just going to go on top and press. And that way I know the feet are going to be level. Okay. From here, I could do a little additional texture on the feet, sort of play with that a little bit. I could sort of come around and add some carving. Now remember, when we add carving like this, just, you know, I'm doing very, very minimal strokes. Think about it like fine pencil work, just accentuating some of the pattern that's there. What's nice is if I, you know, bisque fired this and then essentially say I did an oxide wash, okay, that oxide is going to reside in my carving and in the texture, and it can wipe off the sort of raised clay surface. And then if I do a glaze on that, then the oxide is going to run and it's going to accentuate the texture, also giving, you know, this really nice sort of juicy look here. And I'm going to, again, accentuate this sort of square patterning by the feet. I'm actually very kind of into that. All right. So I'm gonna go ahead and just bring the camera a little closer here so you all can see what I've done. So you can see some of the score marks there, the texture on the feet, and that's really what we're going for. So remember that clay has many lives. It is first clay. Then it is bisqued ceramic, right? Which I think about like adolescence. So if we all look back at our, school book photos from when we were 13, we all wish that those could disappear. That's how I feel about bisqued work. It's like in that awkward stage of life. But then once you start throwing oxides, underglazes, slips, you could slip and underglaze this right now. Okay? So remember, slips are just wet clay with colorants. So you can buy mason stains online. You can use the clay you have, slake that down to a slip. Carefully add minimal amounts of your mason stain. Remember, if it looks dark when it's wet, it's going to look darker when it's fired. So always use less, and you can always consider doing like test tiles. But you could do slip while it's wet. Wait till it's more leather to do your slip processes there. Once it's in that bisqued stage, again, that awkward stage in life, we could do oxide washes. And then after that, think about what glazing you want to do. Remember again that any vessel has an exterior and an interior. And how are you going to treat those differently, right? So maybe I want this to be more or less natural, clear, using oxides. But then on the sort of usable, functional side, maybe I just want to do a really nice white. Right? So then you have this nice juxtaposition where you're allowing the vessel to have some energy and sort of speak to itself, have a language. But then the part that's being functional, that white background almost acts as a canvas to really highlight the food or whatever you're serving on that platter, right? So think about that. That's really what you want to start to consider, is how are these things going to be finished, okay? That's pretty much it. So what I'm going to do is leave this out for just a little bit being 20 minutes, just to kind of dry up a little bit. Then I'm going to basically go ahead and just give it a little, what I call a nightcap, right? Little spray. Go ahead and move that real quick. And then I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. So the reason I put the plastic down on my wear board is now, after I've let that set for a little bit, remember we got to put this to bed. It's had a hard day at work. So again, I have butterfly clips. I hoard them. Do not leave your butterfly clips around me. They will be gone and they will end up on my work. I hoard them. All right. And then I'll just leave that guy to rest overnight, remembering that we added feet. We worked that clay. We stressed it out a little bit by spraying it with its nightcap, wrapping it up, tucking it into bed. We're going to let it take a nap, have a good night's rest. And then I can either come back later this evening or tomorrow, unwrap it. At that point, I can use my sponge to sort of clean up any obvious areas. But remember that as this dries, as it goes to leather, as it goes to bone dry, I can do more and more detail work. So once it's at leather, those boogers you get sometimes when you cut, for instance, those just flake off, right? Whereas if I try and deal with those when they're wet, they smush, and then I got to go back in and clean it up. I might as well wait, leave them, and flick them off, right? Likewise, when it gets to bone dry, one of my favorite tools, which I'm trying to see if I have around, I don't know where it is, but one of my favorite tools is the green scrubby part of the sponge, right? So it's almost like sandpaper. So if I have an area where I'm like, ooh, I want to get rid of that, I can come and I can actually just sand that off, and it's going to take away that bone dry clay, and it's going to clean up that surface really well for me, okay? So I'm going to let that hang out, and then, we'll take a look at this maybe next week Again, I do have kilns at my house. I'm very fortunate for that. So I might even bisque this guy when he's ready and show you all the results of that. Okay? That's it for now. Have fun with your texture tools. Remember, I didn't bake mine as much. This was 200 degrees for like 4 hours. So the fact that I still have this dough here is it's a good indication to me that I probably need more salt, more flour, or less water. Okay? I can continue to add flour even if I've already mixed, just like you would add flour when you're kneading in bread. So again, I have more of this in my fridge right now, so I could easily go back, make some more tools, do some more testing, right? All we have at this point is time, so let's make the most of it and have fun while we do that. Thank you guys so much. Really hope you enjoy some of these fun projects. And, leave comments or be in touch on Canvas and let me know how things are going. But see you next week.